the tripod, and I really should be because otherwise you can get sort of shaky hands. But here's the capote so far as we have it. I'll just kind of bring up front, up to the top. Hopefully my light overhead is not too overwhelming. So there's the side that's not done. There's my seams on the sides to put the front and back together, which I didn't really need to do. And then this is the fringe cap for the sleeve. And the sleeve, you'll notice, has a fringe on it too, which didn't occur in the pattern. I have a seam at the bottom. And I have a seam at the top. Let me move over to another area and I'll explain what happened. So, of course, I've had to cut out a second set of sleeves. As I mentioned earlier, this really should have been put onto a fold line, because this is only half a sleeve and they really didn't make it clear on the instructions. There's a lot missing on the instructions, so here's what I should have done, really. So I've written in here fold line. Let me flip that around so it's easier for you to see. So I've written fold line in here and I drew an arrow, so the next time I make this pattern, this will be on a fold line. Because this is only half a sleeve, really. If I were to try and turn this into a sleeve and sew this together, the problem is, this is where the upper part of the arm should go. My hand literally just fits through there. And the upper arm is much bigger than my hand. And in fact, my friend, his hand is significantly bigger than mine. So there is no way that that is going to fit an arm. So, of course, now I have to double it, which is what I've done. It really would make it a whole lot easier if I didn't have to sew this side together, if this was just on the fold line, but they don't make that clear in the pattern, and that's okay. It's fine. It's all about learning. As I've said before, I'm definitely not a seamstress, so I use very different patterns for my high jackets and stuff. So I'm going to be putting a welt along the bottom here. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not part of the pattern, but I'm going to be putting a fringe along this part here because I don't want a seam on the top. And the best thing I can do is put a fringe on here. And fringes are actually not for decoration, really. They're for drawing water away from a seam. And so to leave a seam open on the top of a sleeve, in my opinion, is not really good. I don't really like to have fringe line on the top, but in this case, it's going to have to work. And then, of course, there will be the fringe cap that will go on top here. Now, the way the fringe cap fits is not ideal because it only kind of comes down to about here, I think. So it covers just over the shoulder to where the armpit goes, which means I now also have to put a welt in from here to here. Also trying to fit this into the sleeve hole, this is slightly bigger, so I'm going to have to ease everything in. So I'm going to show you that whole process. I'm going to actually get the welt sewn in first, and I'll show you how I do that. And I'm going to pin that in, and then I'm also going to pin in the fringe line on here too. So I'll be right back once I get that pinned in, and then I'll show you how I sew that. Okay, so I have the fringe cut out, and I have the welt cut out here. Now, you'll notice this is probably not the straightest cut ever, but the cool thing is that very much like hide, this is pretty flexible, and I will get a fairly straight line on that. And this is a really important thing to put in, having a welt. That's really quite critical. Here is I've just pulled this back, this sleeve, folded it over. I have put my fringe line down even with the edge, and I've taken it down from the top by just a couple of millimeters. I'm going to replace that. I'm just going to pin a few places along the side, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the welt. I'm not going to film me sewing the whole thing because this video is already getting pretty long. Okay, so the key is to make sure that all 3 layers stay equal, that they all stay together at the top as I'm sewing. Now, as I mentioned, I don't have the fringe going all the way up to the top here, and that's okay. That's actually preferable. So the way I start this is I make sure that the top is equal, and then I want to just get my needle in there. And this is about 1.5 arms span, and I always leave my tail kind of not all the way down to the bottom. You don't need to double thread this or double whatever. You don't need to do that. That's totally unnecessary. But I'm going to pull this through most of the way, and then I'm going to just simply tie a knot. And it's just a double thumb knot I'm going to do. There's no need to do anything more than that because I'm actually going to sew this all the way in along the top of my seam here. All right, so I'm going to lay that down along the seam here, and I'm always going to come in the same spot, always in the front here. So I want to come in a couple of millimeters down below the seam line there, and pull my needle through until I get a small loop, and then I'm going to bring my needle in through the back of the loop, through there, and this will trap the thread loop right along the top of the seam. And if I pull, get my hand out of the way, you'll see. Okay, and again, pretty soon that'll just stay along the top. I'm just going to turn a bit because my hand is really taking up a lot of the making shadows here, so it's kind of harder to see, I think. Okay, so again, I'm going to put my needle in. I want these stitches really close together, so you'll see they're probably around 1 millimeter apart from each other. Might be hard to see with that thread color, but they are about 1 millimeter apart and about 2 millimeters down below the seam line. Again, I'm going to pull until I have a loop. Needle will go through the loop, and I'll catch on my counter, get rid of the excess thread, and I'm just going to pull. And as I do, it's going to trap that thread, and I give it a really good, tight, snug pull. And all the while as I'm sewing, I'm going to continually check and make sure that my 3 layers are all equal at the top. So again, I'm coming in nice and close. So I'm only going to do a few stitches here. This is really all I'm going to be doing all the way down to the end. So you don't need to watch me sew for hours. As I catch on my camera equipment, my pin box, my countertop, and I'm also standing while I'm sewing right now. Everything is now sewn, nice and solid along both sides. Next thing we got to do now is we have to turn this the right way around. That looks pretty good. That looks like a pretty good sleeve. I have to cut the fringe, but I'm not going to do it all right now. I'm only going to cut a couple of them just so I can get them out of my way when I sew this into the main part of the body. But I don't want to cut the whole fringe just in case I have to back some stitching up or whatever, because maybe I've made a mistake. And because this is the first time I've made this pattern, and I have made a few mistakes but also found mistakes in the pattern itself, so I don't want to take any chances. I want to just leave that as it is. Fairly wide fringe. Normally on my buckskins I do a pretty thin strip, but for this one we'll do it kind of thick, and I'm not too worried about it being smack on exactly. So that's all I'm going to do for now. Okay, here is where things can get just a tiny bit complicated. I'm going to pull this jacket off. So I've got the jacket turned inside out again, and this is the area where I have not put the sleeve on as of yet. And I've got my sleeve here. What I want to do is I want to match this seam up with the seam at the top of the shoulder. And what I need to do is take the whole sleeve and put it through the opening. And this is the right side out, and this is the right side. So I'm going to just pull that all the way through. Okay, might be hard to see, but I've got, there's my sleeve, there's the top of my shoulder, and I need to match those two up just like that. However, in between those I have to insert the fringe cap. I'm going to tuck those fringes down as well, and this is the fringe cap. So I'm going to get my pins out. And I want to tuck it down so the center of this has to match up with those two right there. So I'm going to fold it in half so I can find where the center is. Mark it with my fingers. Actually, I'll put a pin on it just so I don't have to go seeking it afterwards, because I am going to have to stuff this into the sleeve as well. So that's going to go inside. I'm going to tuck it down and around. This is fiddly. No getting away from it. It can be fiddly. All right, so that's in. Now I'm just going to match this pin up with the center here and make sure the edges are even. And then I'm going to match this seam up with that pin as well and make sure all the edges are even. Now the next thing is, this is going to be my welt, and I don't need a welt quite so wide. I'm just going to end up cutting quite a bit of it off anyway, so I'm going to just trim that down. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing as what I did up at the top. I'm going to just pin my welt here just so I don't keep losing it. But I don't want to run the welt in underneath the fringe cap, because I don't need it to be there, because the fringe cap itself will kind of turn into a welt on its own. So again, a bit of a jumbled mess here. I'm going to remove that pin for now. And I'm going to pin to the inside here. So this is the bottom seam here, and I just want to stabilize it just along here a little bit. And I'm going to do the same to the other side. And hopefully this is going to make sense to you. Okay, So I've got all of the seams together. This is the bottom. So far I've got the welt in here. I've got the top done, 4 pins along the top here. Now we need to pin in the sides. What we want to do is we want to line up this sleeve cap here. And I'm going to just sort of pin it to the outside for now. I'm going to repin afterwards. I just want to make sure that this is pretty much solidly in place. And again, that welt, we're probably going to end up trimming it up a tiny bit more afterwards. We'll just see how much overlap we end up having. And you can see there's probably going to be a significant amount. So there's our welt right there. So I'm going to trim that up in a bit, not right away. I can actually trim it up while I sew. So this is the outside of the jacket here, and you can see there's all of this excess fabric. It won't stretch out. So what I have to do is find the middle of that, and I'm going to bring it inwards from the center, and I'm going to pin that. I'm going to pin that on the inside because I'll actually be sewing on the inside of the sleeve. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Okay, so that's the center. Now I'm going to move over a little bit, and I'm going to find where it's really gapping out, and I'm going to bring that in. In fact, I'll take that pin out, and I'll just pin it in there. Now, when you do this, you kind of end up easing all of this in, and it seems to flatten out fairly well once you sew it. You can see there, it's actually not, you're going to get kind of maybe a little bit of waving, but you won't even see that. So I'm going to pop another pin onto that. And all I'm doing is pinning. I know you can't see because my fingers are sort of in the way, but I'm just pinning everything in place here. All right, so there's that part. And you can still see some of these little gaps, but like I say, it's going to go away. Once you sew, it's going to be gone. Now, I am going to definitely cut this a little bit more. This welt can get cut down just a touch more. It's pretty big. So that's almost perfect. So now we're going to have this part coming in pretty close into the center there, close to where that welt is anyway. Now this part here might be just a little bit more difficult to manage, and that's okay. And all I'm doing is just trying to make sure that the edges at the top line up. That's the most important part right now. All the rest of this, that you can kind of ease in and fix sort of later on. Okay, so I probably could even move this up this way a little bit more. So I might straighten that out afterwards, just see how well it's going to work for me. I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other side of the sleeve now. I'm going to get that all pinned in place, and then I'm going to show you how I start sewing this. Okay, this video is just getting way too long. We're going to continue this in part 3. See you next week. And hey, if you like what you see, please remember to like and subscribe.